Hey y'all, what's up? I know it's been a while, but today I'm going to be talking about unhealthy relationships. I wanted to go ahead and close out this series that I've been doing this month about self-care, self-love, and self-respect. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my own personal experience in an unhealthy and abusive relationship, in hopes that it kind of sheds light into why people say that it's not always because they're fearful of leaving. Sometimes people stay simply because it's kind of a weird psychological thing, but you honestly think that you can help the abuser in the situation. And so I'm gonna kind of elaborate on that portion as well. Okay, so I actually wore orange today because the month of February, if you didn't know, but the month of February is actually National Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And most people don't know that a lot of teenagers experience abuse at young ages. So the National Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, they pretty much had Orange Day about 2 weeks ago, and I think it's so important to have platforms like this that provide education and resources for those that are experiencing abuse, because a lot of times when you're dating someone or you find yourself in that situation, you feel like you're alone and that no one else will understand or be able to assist you in getting out of that unhealthy relationship. So if you didn't know, 1 in 3 teens will experience physical, sexual, or emotional abuse while in a relationship before adulthood. Also, 2/3 of teens in an abusive relationship don't tell anyone, and I just happen to fall in both of those categories. So when I was a senior in high school, actually, I found myself in a abusive relationship, and I think for me, because our relationship didn't start out that way, I more so viewed it as a phase, something that the individual would, in a sense, grow out of, and that I had the power and the strength to help them grow out of it. So I didn't tell anyone because I didn't feel like anyone would understand, and I also was very fearful about, for some odd reason, about them getting in trouble. Like, I didn't want this to affect them long term, but I also didn't want to be viewed as that girl. So I think there was some embarrassment and some shame and some guilt there as well as to why I didn't report what I was experiencing. But this month, the National Teen Dating Violence Awareness Organization, their theme for this year is to know your worth. And I think that's so important, because I think as a senior in high school, when I was trying to just figure everything out as far as like belonging and what my role was and like where did I fit best, I don't know that I knew my worth or that I valued and appreciated it. So Love is Respect, that's an organization who offers 24/7 support and advocacy to young people between the ages of 13 and 26. They help build healthy relationships, and also their goal is to end dating abuse. And of course, if you are a teenager who is experiencing dating abuse, you can text Love Is, all caps, to 22522, and there will be someone that can assist you with next steps or with resources that will serve you or someone that you may know who's in an abusive relationship. So I want to talk about recently, I know that there was an interview on CBS this morning in regards to the Seattle Seahawks former Seattle Seahawks player, Chad Wheeler, who attacked his girlfriend, Aaliyah Taylor. And she actually decided to be bold and courageous and show up to their court date. I think what's so traumatizing about their story is that this was the first incident, and it left her with a fractured arm and a dislocated elbow, and she'll have bolts and steel plates in her arm forever. And I think that, of course, he showed up to court, pled not guilty to the 3 charges, including domestic violence assault. I think people sometimes have a misconception about dating abuse and what it looks like. I think also, you kind of make the misconception that someone must have done something, to deserve the response from that individual. And I hope that that's not your thinking process. No one deserves to be put in an abusive relationship, or to be put in fear, or have to live in fear, or to date someone in fear or out of fear. So I'm going to talk about the signs that may reveal that you're in an unhealthy relationship. I will say, in regards to like Aaliyah Taylor, like, so courageous of her to be very open and forthcoming, like, with her experience, so that she can, of course, help others. I know that there has to be, of course, some level of, I'm pretty sure in the back of her mind, fear as to what people are going to say and think about her as an individual. But I think that, people don't know that there are men and women every day who find themselves in abusive relationships, abusive, marriages, and abusive homes. And so I just hope that we start to support those individuals who are willing to come out and share their story, and that we believe them versus questioning how they contributed to the individual displaying that behavior. So signs that may reveal that you're in an unhealthy relationship. One would be controlling behavior. So at any point, controlling behavior or not respecting your boundaries. So if at any point the person that you're dating, and again, men and women can both become victims of abuse in relationships, but if you ever feel like the person that you're dating or the person that you're with does not respect your boundaries, and is somewhat, in a sense, trying to control your every move, then that relationship may be the first sign of it being unhealthy. I think it's so important that in the beginning of a relationship, you set boundaries, they set boundaries, and that individual respect the boundaries that are in place. And anyone that's not willing, of course, to respect your boundaries is someone that I don't know that you want to invest time and effort with. So I would just say be mindful of that, especially if they're trying to control like what you wear, who you engage and interact with, like where you go and like what time you go. I think it's so important that you mark that as like a red flag. Secondly would be like any like explosive outbursts, temper or mood swings. So when I was in that relationship, that was probably the first sign. But because this was my first experience, I didn't know, and I was very clueless as to why the person was having these, mood swings in a sense. And I also, in the beginning, very much so believed it was something that I was doing or saying. So I immediately started to place the blame on myself. And I would say that was probably me being naive, of course, in doing that. But that would be the second sign. The third sign that your relationship is unhealthy would be if the individual is putting you down frequently, especially if they do so in front of others. So I would say it's so important that you date someone who loves you and genuinely cares about you and respects you, and would never want to shame you or embarrass you by any means. So I would say that would be the third sign if they find that they're putting you down. Number 4 is them not being supportive of opportunities. So a lot of times when you're in an unhealthy relationship, you'll find that the individual is jealous of your time and focus being elsewhere, because they want all of your time and focus and efforts to be on them. So you'll find that the individual is not going to be supportive of you advancing in life, or on your job, or just in life in general. So they will somewhat try to isolate you so that you only have time for them. And I think when you're young, like I was at the time, you think that's cute, but there's nothing cute about someone trying to control you or manipulate you into thinking that all of your focus, attention, and effort should be on them. Number 5, of course, is any form of physical harm. So like I said, I was young, naive, and I had been dating this person at least a year before the abuse started. And it's so crazy because when I was dating them, there are a lot of incidents that I can't fully remember because I would do this thing where I would just black out because I didn't want to remember them in that light. So I sometimes get frustrated with myself, especially in times like this where I want to share, my story and talk about, the testimony. But the incidents that I do remember in regards to physical abuse, I just remember, of course, wanting it to be over. So I got to the point where I no longer would attempt to fight back. I no longer would attempt to even try to use my words and cry out for help or stop, because those things never helped in the past. I just simply almost gave up all of my strength because I just wanted it to finish. And I felt like the less responsive that I was, the quicker the incident would take place and occur, and it would be the end all be all. And like I said, it's disheartening now because I'm pretty sure had I shared with someone, they of course would have believed me and would have been able to assist me in getting out of it. But I just didn't feel like I had anyone that I could trust or that I felt like would understand the situation. So I also wanted to share how you can support others and things that you shouldn't say to those that you may know of that are in an abusive relationship. So number 1, you should never question the victim or the survivor and say what are you doing to provoke this sort of behavior. That's low-key, it's insensitive, and it's also disrespectful in a sense to assume that the individual is causing someone or signing up to be abused regularly. So I think that would be the first thing. That's one of the first things that people would always sometimes ask is what did you do, or what did you say before they raised their hand at you, or before they started to have an explosive outburst or temper. So never assume and never make that accusation to the victim or survivor. You have no idea what that does to their healing process or their thought process if they're trying to get out or get away from the abuser. The second thing that a lot of people will sometimes forget to do in regards to providing support to those that are experiencing abuse is to simply listen to what they need. Sometimes just simply listening to what the survivor or the victim needs, and also choosing not to argue with them or judge them for their response. So no one ever, even when it started to get out or out to my classmates about me being in an abusive relationship in high school, no one ever took the time to ask me what did I need as far as support. Everyone assumed they knew what I needed, and it was to get the individual who was my boyfriend at the time, to get them into trouble. And that was honestly the last thing that I was focused on. And then I would say the third thing that people say that is sometimes just not appropriate is just leave or fight back. Honestly, it's really not as simple as to just leave. And the thing about fighting back is that you don't know how many times that individual has attempted to fight back. And so they recognize that someone that's experiencing abuse feel at their lowest point. And so for you to make statements well, you should just fight back, or, only weak people would stay in that, you have no idea why that person is staying. And again, you may not understand or agree with their reasoning, but recognize if they really need a plan to get out. I didn't have a plan to get out. I really don't even know if I had the strength anymore to want out. I knew I wanted it to end as far as the abuse, but I don't know that I had the strength anymore to get out of the relationship. And the very last incident, for some odd reason, it was a cop. When the cop showed up telling me how lucky I was and how different the situation could have went had my roommate not walked in at the time that she did. And for some odd reason, that incident just made me realize that like the like it never gets better. If anything, it only gets worse. And so for me, that was kind of like my last straw. And it's so crazy, that whole like story or whatever, but of course my mom had to be called. I was a freshman living on campus in the dorms, and my mom had to be called. And my mom came up there, and I feel like my mom, she knew that I was in an unhealthy relationship, but I don't know she knew to what extent. And I don't know that she even knew how to help me. But her coming up there, and I remember her saying like these words. She was like, "Brittany, I love you, and as you know, I only want what's best for you." And she was like, "I'm just so afraid that if you stay in that relationship, or if you go back to him, you won't make it out next time alive." I remember like hearing her say that, and that being her fear for me as a mom. Like, I don't know why, it just made me bawl into tears. And again, like that was the end for both of us. He left before the cops had arrived, but like we never reached back out. Like there was never a breakup. Like we just went our separate ways. And again, like it literally was because my roommate just so happened to walk in to the dorm room. And so again, I would just say be very mindful when you're talking to someone that's experiencing abuse, because you have no idea as far as their mental capacity and kind of how they view themselves, how they see themselves. And you could honestly cause them to backtrack because you're being judgmental, or you're making an assumption about their relationship when you don't know their story, or you don't know the situation. So I just wanted to share that. Remember that you deserve the best, and healthy is best. And so you want to make sure that you always choose to be in circles and centered with people that want to support you, and that believe in you, and that want what's best for you. And I think you as an individual have to define what love is. And it's not until you recognize what love is that you can actually receive love in its purest form. So now I know that love is respect. Like now I recognize that love is patient, like love being kind, like love is self-respect, love is self-care. And so I think, for me, and knowing the signs now of unhealthy relationships, I can always sense when my friends are in unhealthy relationships. And I always go back to that little girl that I was in high school, who simply just needed someone not to judge me, not to question why I was staying, but to simply be a support system for me, and someone that I knew that I could lean on and trust. And so that is, I think, what people need more than anything. And I know that you always think that you know what's best for someone because you're on the outside looking in, but you just never know to what extent. You never know what how limited of resources the individual has, so they can't just up and leave because they have nowhere to go, or they don't have the funds to just pack up and go. Like I said, I was in high school, and I was just trying to figure it all out and what my next steps were after high school. And so no one knew I was in an abusive relationship, because I was still active in school. I was still doing all of the things that high school seniors do, and I was doing it with a smile. And so no one knew. And then when the word started to get out, of course, I felt like, walking around with the letter, the scarlet letter, of course, because it was like that literally became my identity. And that people would then only recognize me as the girl who was in an abusive relationship. It's so important that respect be at the center of every relationship. That's with work, that's with your friends, and that's also with the little boo thing. So the individual who I was dating at that time definitely would have these mood swings, and I talk about in my blog how it was so weird for me. And again, you can go read the blog. The link is in my bio. But that it was so weird for me because this is someone that I was engaged with sexually as well. So it's really a psychological thing to be engaged in that sense with your abuser and to enjoy it, but then recognizing that shortly after that encounter, they could literally flip the switch on you and become the other person, the person that you're afraid of, the person that you're fearful of, the person that doesn't respect your boundaries. And so again, like I said, I was very young, very naive, and I just didn't feel like I had anyone who would understand or who could help me and him, because again, that's why I stayed. I thought I could help him get through this phase that he was going through, because again, we dated for a year and everything was peachy. So then we went into our second year of things when things kind of took a turn for the worse. Like I said, and no one knew. Even when the word started to get out, people were like, wait, are you talking about Brittany? Like Brittany that's involved in this, Brittany that's over this, that Brittany? Because it was really hard for people to put me, Brittany, right, or maybe the facade of who they thought Brittany was, in a relationship with someone who was abusive. And again, abuse is all about someone being manipulative and controlling you. And I think for a long time, I mistaken them being concerned equal to them being manipulative towards me. So I was, like I said, very young and naive. But I can remember bits and pieces of stories and times that things were definitely going for turn for worse. Like I can remember this time very vividly of like him asking me to meet him at the park, and I got to the park first, and him coming at me had to be like 50-60 miles per hour, and literally like fearful and running and not really sure where to go because we're literally at the park, like on this little hill piece, and him coming at me like that, and thinking that sort of stuff was funny. I can also remember a time where I was sitting in my car like trying to leave his residence, or a place of residence, and me being pulled out of my car by my legs and him having me up like this. So he has my legs in the air and my head on the ground. I can remember going home that day being covered in leaves, and I had on like this white like woolly sweater, so literally when I walked in I had leaves everywhere. So I can remember that very vividly. And I can also remember our like the final straw, in a sense of he had come over and like there was a text on my phone. The text said, hey, it was from a number that wasn't saved, and we were at the dorm at UNA, so shout out to all the UNA folks in the room, Roar Lions. But I lived in Appleby East, which is an all-female dorm, and of course we could have guests. But I can remember him coming over. He was going to set up my router because I was having issues with like internet and stuff, my internet connection. And of course the text came in, and I can just remember him like questioning me about who that person could be. And again, y'all, the text said, hey, H-E-Y. And I remember him being so pressed, and I could remember like his tone with me getting louder and louder, and me becoming fearful as if though this was about to take a turn for the worse. And next thing I know, like I was laying on my bed, and I had my bed on the highest riser, you know, because you can get a little height, because you can get more junk underneath. And literally me being pushed off of my bedpost on the floor. And unfortunately, immediately, right, a reflex is for you to get back up. I noticed I couldn't get back up. Like something was hindering me from being able to get up quick enough. So I can remember that day being like him coming and grabbing me from the floor and pinning me up against the wall, still asking questions about the text or whatever. I can remember being thrown back on the ground and him getting on top of me and raising his fist back. And at that point, I started to do the thing where I close my eyes and I'm about to do my little blackout thing, because again, I had grown very comfortable in not fighting back, because I felt like fighting back would extend the abuse. And so the less resistance that I put up, I felt like the quicker it would take place and we would be over and done with it. But I remember him raising his sis back, and I started to do my blackout thing, and literally, y'all, at that moment, my dorm room door opens and it's my roommate. And I think initially she thought she walked in on something else. I'll never forget her. Her name was Holly. Holly Jacobs, actually. And she walked in and she was like, you know, she closes the door, but then she opens and she's like, get off of her, I'm calling the cops. She immediately goes to get help, calls the cops. And I remember him standing at the door and saying, look what you did now, and leaving. And y'all, from that, like, the cops had to be called, a report had to be made. And that was the actual first report that I had ever made. And at that point, I had probably been in an abusive relationship with him for over a year and a half. It was so crazy because before that incident, we had actually had a little hiatus of no abuse, no raising of the voice, no anything of the sort. And he actually, what happened is that word had got around the school that I was in an abusive relationship. And because I was super involved, there were some teachers who were concerned about me. One teacher even said that I just didn't look like myself anymore. She would always ask like, how are you doing today? Or how are you feeling? I'd be like, I'm good. And she's like, you just don't look like your happy self. I think I had told her that, like, me and my boyfriend at the time had, like, kind of had a disagreement, but I didn't go into detail because, again, my goal was to never get him in trouble. And I also did not want to be labeled as the girl who was dating the guy that's abusive, because who wants to have that title in high school? But anywho, the word got around school, y'all, and the school resource officer called him into the office just to question him. I think he thought that I had made a report to the school resource officer, and so he started singing like a canary about the incident that had taken place last night, where he had pulled me out of the car from my legs and dragging me on the ground like that. And at that point, like, his mom was called, and it became a big ordeal. And I can remember being so shameful, and I remember being so mad at the teacher who even went and made the report, because I thought she has no idea how much worse she's made the incident. So again, I'm not telling anyone that you shouldn't report. Maybe you should just communicate to the individual that you are planning to report, just because you don't know what more is going to take place after the report is made. But I had not made a report until that very last incident in the Appleby dorms. And again, like, honestly, I don't think he ever laid a hand on anyone else after he dated me, because I think that incident where the cops showed up and everything, I think that was kind of an eye-opener for both of us. I recognized I never wanted to be with anyone who could not respect me as a person, and I recognized at that point that them putting their hands on me was probably the most disrespectful thing a person could do. So I've never been in another abusive relationship, but I do think it's important that I talk about these things, because I think that there are so many other people who simply have just not found the courage within themselves to share their story. And so you do feel like you're alone, and you do feel like you're being judged. And trust me, I understand, because I felt all of the above. So that's why I share my story. And I don't talk about this experience often as far as being in an abusive relationship, but I do try to talk about it every February and every October. That's why I have on purple earrings as well. I think it's important that we talk about it, and that we also provide support to those who are experiencing that.